Capturing Economic Value in India, which is being presented by Scotch Group and in collaboration with Research and Information System for Developing Countries. So I would like to welcome all our esteemed delegates and speakers. And to start with, I would like to welcome Dr. Sachin Chaturvedi, Author and Director General, RIS. Please, everyone, please give a round of applause, please. Thank you. Mr. Pradeep Mehta, Author and Secretary General, Kutch International. Dr. Burnali Bhandari, Senior Fellow, NCAER. Dr. Nagesh Kumar is not there. He'll be joining us a bit late. And Mr. Abhijit Das, Author and Professor and Head of Center for WTO Studies, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. This particular session will be moderated by Dr. Mohan Kumar, Author of Negotiation Dynamics of the WTO and Insider's Account, Professor and Vice Dean, Jindal School of International Affairs and Chairman, Research and Information System for Developing Countries. Over to you, Dr. Kumar. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. And I see that there are some breakout sessions, so we don't have a full house, but I hope you will make it up with quality rather than the house being full. So it gives me immense pleasure to chair this panel. I have a wonderful panel. I don't think many of them need any introduction, but I will begin by just making a few opening remarks on the state of play in the WTO, and then make a few remarks about what India should do in terms of not just combating the existential crisis at the WTO, but also the global economic crisis and our own economic slowdown in India that we are confronting. So let me begin by talking about the WTO. Very briefly, the WTO, I think, it's clear now, has moved from multilateral negotiations to plurilateral negotiations. I think it was based on largely MFN, most favored nation. It appears to have now shifted to preferential tariffs. Indeed, there are studies to show that most of the trade now that is happening and will happen in the future is going to be really preferential trade. There are issues with regard to single undertaking in terms of what you accept and what you don't accept in the WTO. You can now pick and choose. So if you don't want to participate in e-commerce negotiations, that's fine, but you can choose to participate in investment negotiations. You can choose to participate in fisheries negotiations without having anything to do in another sector such as services or domestic regulation, which is what India is doing, by the way. So we have gone to cherry picking, which is against the rule of the single undertaking. And finally, the dispute settlement system in the WTO, which was really the jewel in the crown for those of us who were present at Marrakesh and who launched this wonderful organization, that has been pretty much ground to a halt, not exclusively, but largely because of the actions of the United States. And it goes back to even before Donald Trump. We can blame a lot of things on President Trump, but this you will have to go back. Even before him, I think US took the position that appellate body was not suiting its interest. So we have this situation in the WTO. I will merely say that the WTO was, I think everybody will agree, very useful for India, because the MFN, the most favored nation clause or system, produces security and predictability for international trade. And India benefited from it. I don't think it can be anybody's case that we did not benefit. The WTO was not always to our liking, and we often said no to negotiations. You are aware of that. Nevertheless, I want to make this point that the WTO and the system that it created largely benefited India's interests. So we have a problem now, and I would like to request the panelists to address this aspect as to what India should now do. We've already said no to RCEP. So what do we do with regard to international trade? The other two things I wanted to provoke my fellow panelists is by saying, last 10 years, India's share of trade in its GDP is going down systematically for the last 10 years. So really, there are indications that we are becoming less and less part of the international trading system as well. The other is the global value chains, and I was there the other day at Brookings when a young, not so young now, I think he's my age, but anyway, Aditya Mattu was making a presentation, and he said, even in terms of global value chains, our backward and forward integration are showing signs of falling. So these are
we have had several technology statements right in the domain. But what is now important is to connect our industrial policy. And that draft is pending for last 4 years. It is going round and round. We need to quickly finalize industrial policy, and we need to see that how we are going to go forward. If you look at this, what matters is the scale, and that scale for us is important. If you look at Amazon, you look at the other key actors which have emerged. So there are small technologically successful firms, but they haven't scaled it up. And as a result, I think the scaling up that is needed is much more important. In the other character is in terms of how we allow space for private sector to grow. In 1978, almost 100% of China's produce was from public sector. But now only 20% is left with the public sector. Rest all is by private firms in China. So that I think is absolutely important. You, Dr. Kumar, did mention about whether east or west, what should be our focus and what direction we really go in. In 1971, Asia, including Japan, had a share in the global industrial production of only 19%, and 56% was with the West. Now, we are in a century where Asia has a global share of around 56%, and only 37% in the global industrial production is left with the West. So obviously the market is clear. India has to focus on Africa. India has to focus on Latin America. That's where the future market is. So technology and redirection in terms of market access, I think, is going to contribute in terms of what edge is required. I would stop here.
Thank you very much. I am not going to summarize the excellent points made, but just keep it in mind. Technology, Africa, Latin America, I just give you a code word. Can I turn to the only lady in the panel? I'm really delighted to have you, madam. Why don't you address some of the questions I raised? I'm sure you all know her, but I think she's Burnali Bhandari, Senior Fellow with the National Council of Applied Economic Research.
Good afternoon, and thank you for inviting me to the Scotch Foundation. I just, when Dr. Kumar posed the question, East or West, and I reminded myself of the autograph we used to write, East or West, India is the best. Unfortunately, that's no longer true, because if you look at the data and what Dr. Kumar said, I just want to add that with re-emphasize with numbers. Our exports, imports of goods and services growth rate has fallen to 7.4 and 7.6%, or around 7.5% from the previous decade of 14%. That's a halving of our growth rates. Not only that, the interesting thing that when you analyze just numbers, not very casually, not even fancy econometrics, the shares of growth rates, shares of exports and imports have actually gone up to about above 20%. This is just based on the GDP numbers. The question that then comes to us that we pose ourselves is India hitting its trade potential? If we are hitting our trade potential and we cannot go beyond that, essentially when you're reaching your potential, you grow at a slower rate. The question then boils down to the topic of the day: how do we improve our competitiveness? The trade and technology are the answers that traditionally that we have known. But now we are actually asking, should we improve trade or should we improve competitiveness? It's a chicken and egg scenario which comes first. And it would have been it's a no-brainer that the trade we have to open, it's not a choice. The question is then, but there are going to be losers or people who do not gain from trade or are not prepared for openness. So I think the interesting thing again, which I want to add, is that we have two mechanisms that we have developed over the last 10 years significantly. The direct benefit transfers mechanism, I'm not saying it's a work in progress, but it's still a lot of work has been done. Sophisticated mechanisms are being developed over time. And the skilling model has had its shares of shares of pitfalls, but it has grown to be sophisticated. Both central and state governments are working on both these mechanisms, which could be used to actually address these problems. But the second thing that I want to add is technology. And here I also just have some numbers, and I can see they say they are fairly unique. NCR actually conducts a business expectations survey every quarter, and we assess business sentiments. But along with that, we actually look at, sometimes we experiment with asking about business e-readiness, which is essentially looking at the adoption of ICT, information communication and technology. And what we find is that the micro firms, the firms with annual turnover of less than 1 crore, are actually still quite behind their larger size firms. Only about, even though they have adopted ICT in finance and accounting, in the other mechanisms, they're still lagging behind. So I think the third key recommendation sort of is that we need to work on a dedicated basis with micro and small and medium enterprises and work with them so that they can adopt ICT in their production and make them more export-oriented. I think smart and export-oriented SMEs might be one of the key answers we're looking for. Thank you.
So thank you. Just recapitulating very briefly. So small, medium enterprises, emphasis on technology. I still want my panelists later on to answer whether we are able to do this without exposing them to brutal competition. Do you think India is capable of becoming competitive autonomously? That's my question. Because if you're not ready to sign preferential trade agreements, free trade agreements, and I'm not going to ask this religious question as to whether we should have signed the RCEP or not. It's not useful. My question is, how can you become competitive if you're not going to expose your industry? Pradeep Mehta is somebody I turn to now. I met him in 1992 with a jhola and kolhapuri chappal in Geneva when I was first secretary GATT and he walked into my office. The reason I caricature him somewhat is because, Pradeep, I'll be honest, the one thing that never figures in Indian trade debate is consumers' interest. People are all the time talking of lobbies, people talk of producers, people talk of Indian industry facing job losses. Tell me one time when somebody has said, can the Indian consumer benefit with extra choice or not? But this I'm partly provoking you because of your background.
Thank you. In fact, first of all, let me thank Samir Kocher and the Scotch Foundation for this. And those of you who are not here at 9 o'clock in the morning, I was surprised to see the convening power of Scotch Foundation, that we had a huge crowd in the morning. And that was, I mean, all of us were surprised. There were many of us who were talking on the side. That is to be taken out from my time. so that I can come to the... I thought, some of you are not there in the morning, so it's good to...
Over the weekend.
Over the weekend, on a Saturday morning. Now, having said that, I think Mohan has asked me a very pertinent question, and there is a book which is a part of this particular list first session. It's a festive on me on when I turned 70. Mohan has also contributed an excellent essay in that. It's called Putting Consumers First, and that is what we've been talking about since we began, that we often tend to ignore the consumer interest. And I can, the time being very little, I can't get into anecdotes, but just to say that consumers are very important to consider in any public policy making and not just trade policy. Now, answering a question about competitiveness, this is an area that we are working on. In fact, we are looking at 4 labor-intensive sectors, doing a very thorough empirical research to find out as to what is happening or what is not happening, what are the pain points and how should we resolve them. There's the textiles and garments, food processing, tourism, and then we are getting into construction of one more sector. Now, that will give us a fairly good understanding as to how do we, impact the competitiveness. This is not something which was said in the morning also, and something which I would like to refer to what Sachin said was, now, we do not have a convergence between our trade policy and industrial policy and competition policy. These are 3 important pillars of any economic governance, which is what, now at a macro level there is, but at a micro level when you look at various sectors, you'll find there is, it is missing. Like, you get results like inverted duty structure, for example. I'm just giving one example. Sorry, I'm going to rush this because of very limited time. It's a very complex and a very large subject to deal with easily. The problem of improving our competitiveness, another problem that we have is that we are a federation. We are a quasi-federal country, but we are a federation of various states, and each state has to set a target to meet with our $5 trillion economy. UP has already taken the lead. Yogi Adityanath said that we'll aim at $1 trillion, and that if UP can do $1 trillion in the next 5 years, then the others can do. So what we have also spoken about is fragmenting these targets across various states, depending on the sizes, etc., etc. Then when it comes to nuts and bolts, and that is where the problems are, ease of doing business. We heard Amitabh Kant speak about ease of doing business, etc., etc. We are writing a paper on ease of running a business. You heard about that tax terrorism, VG Siddharth of Cafe Coffee Day suiciding, and that is a story which I hear from many businessmen friends of mine. They are not suiciding, thanks God. But the fact is that Siddharth really did shake up, and when Prime Minister came out with a statement that we have to respect our wealth creators. Now, if that kind of statement then sort of boils down across the nation, in spite of the fragmented polity that we have, and which is getting more and more fragmented, we do not have that kind of. How is it that something which is not been addressed since the morning is that how do you deal with many of these issues without a social stability? We do not have social stability as we stand today. Let us be frank and candid about these things. Nobody has spoken about it. They are all afraid. There is social instability today. And how do you deal with this, including in the kind of political issues which come up? Let me go back to WTO in the sense that when you talk about, there are external factors which do help us to improve our competitiveness. Mind you, we liberalized our tariffs voluntarily in 1990s. There was no external pressure. And in fact, there was even a question asked, look, why did you not cash your check? Forget it, we wanted to liberalize ourselves. We brought down our average tariffs to 14% from somewhere. So that time there was no external pressure. That was a decision that a considered decision that we had. China, if those of you may not know, has never been a member of the WTO, founding member. India has been a founding member. China struggled a lot to get into the WTO and got into in Doha ministerial meeting. This is in 2001. 2001. Now, Chinese policymakers said very clearly, we are getting into the WTO to lock our domestic reforms. Let's not forget, when you have these external pressures, that you do dock in. Now, if we had not, I'm looking at TRIPS, without getting into the merits to demerits. If we had not entered into TRIPS, we would not have been able to improve our innovation. The kind of patenting which is already happening. And a lot of these things are not spoken about very clearly, but RIS is doing a lot of work on that. They have covered a lot of these areas. So the kind of progress which has taken place in terms of patenting, which is so important, we would not have done it. We would have continued to do process patenting and reverse engineering and be happy that we built the biggest pharmaceutical industry in the world. So we have competitive sectors that we need to look at, but the point is very simple, that it has to be disaggregated, and chopped up into various segments, like what I said, including every province being given, say, look, what is it that you are going to do in the next 5 years from this $5 trillion basket? How much are you going to contribute? Yogi Adityanath is going to ready to contribute $1 trillion. So in order to do all that, then you have to ensure that your entrepreneurs' animal spirits are let loose. And don't forget that it is inherently there. We have Indians are inherently entrepreneurship. And that is historical if you look at our centuries of history. Thank you.
Thank you, Pradeep. I largely agree with you, but with the following caveats. One, in late 80s, early 90s, when we brought down our tariffs, you're right, you could say we brought it on our own. I would say we went broke.
Yeah.
The country went broke. and there was really no choice. So I would still say we are reformers under compulsion, not out of conviction. But that's, no, I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm glad you made the point. On TRIPS, you make a good point, and there are people who will agree with you, but I'm afraid you will also find people, including in the RIS, who will disagree with you, because there have been costs involved with signing of the TRIPS agreement. The benefits of the TRIPS agreement, call it what you will, but I still don't see the kind of applications for patents from India the way I see from China. And why is that? We claim we are more individualistic, we've got jugaad, the Chinese are only good at discipline, and they're only good at teamwork. We are supposed to be good at individual brilliance. So why don't we apply for patents? So that is a question that will have to be...
I pre-qualified, I am not getting to the merit.
No, true. And Pradeep, none of this is to disagree with what you're saying. I think you raised those issues, but those issues are less black and white is what I'm saying. So I now turn to Professor Abhijit Das, and I always, when I am asked to introduce him, I always think of his father, because his father was the lead negotiator and India's first representative to GATT, as it was known, even before WTO. But the great pleasure in introducing Abhijit Das is that I can always say he's chip of the old block. So that one can say very briefly, done a lot of commendable work. And I hope I don't get into trouble, or I don't get you into trouble, Abhijit, by saying this. 50% of Commerce Ministry's intellectual output is sitting here. But that would be a bit, I don't want you to get into trouble. He does a lot of work for the Commerce Ministry, which is fair to say. And I think it's been a pleasure interacting with him. Abhijit, don't talk of electronic commerce. Don't talk of technology, because now I find that there is time. So I want to, starting with my colleague Sachin, I want to again pick the brains in the next round on 5G, technology, and electronic commerce. So without touching on those, you're most welcome to talk about whatever you like. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, for a very generous introduction. And I'm also grateful to the Scotch Foundation for having me here. I wanted to start with electronic commerce, but in due deference to what the Chair wants me not to speak on, I'll keep it for the next round. I'll start with the issue of domestic reforms. There are two perspectives. One perspective is we reform only under pressure. We can reform if we sign trade agreements. My apprehension in following the prescription that we reform by signing trade agreements is that we miss out on the opportunity of deciding which sector to reform, what should be the pace of reform, what should be the depth of reform. And if we do not take these three variables into consideration adequately, then we might be led astray in the wrong direction. So my submission before this August House is that the reform in the Indian economy has to be domestically led and not determined by external considerations. The second point is on competitiveness, and I will link that with global value chains. The common prescription that we get from World Bank, UNCTAD, even from the WTO, is that, well, you lower your tariffs, make your trade regime more liberal, and maybe that is the mantra to get linked into global value chains. It's partly right, but all these prescriptions forget two very important variables. Sachin mentioned it in passing. What is really preventing us from capturing value in global value chains is our labor. Our labor laws are too rigid. Thereby, we are missing out on economies of scale. Bangladesh is a prime example. How many industrial units do we have in India which employ more than 1,000 labor? I think we can count on our fingertips. And maybe our fingers will run out before the number of units run out. Go to Dhaka. You literally have hundreds of such units there. We are really missing out on the opportunity of integrating into global value chains, of generating incomes, and more importantly, generating employment. So one of the most fundamental and perhaps the most important reform which is required domestically for capturing value is labor reforms. That is what will help us garner gains from economies of scale. And that, I think, is the way to go about. Even if we liberalize our trade policy, If we do not do labor reforms, I'm afraid the gains will just not come to us. A very quick look at WTO issues. The chair mentioned in passing about what's happening at the crown jewel of the WTO, namely the appellate body. Some of you might be aware that the dispute settlement at the WTO works at two levels. There's something called a panel, and some aspects of the legal interpretation of panel reports can be appealed. And if in the absence of the appellate body, effectively, there is no dispute settlement system. And if there's no dispute settlement system, we do not have a system for legally making sure that countries comply with their obligations and other countries enjoy their rights. Now, US is the culprit in this. But having said that, what can India do? We can, of course, keep on arguing that we want to revive the appellate body, but the important point is appellate body is a public good. And there are demands that developing countries like India make a payment to revive the appellate body. That I don't think is the right way forward. We must be pragmatic enough, and the central point we must bear in mind is whatever reforms happen in the dispute settlement system, we must be a part of only that reform which includes United States in it. Many alternatives are being considered which do not include United States. That I do not think is the way to go forward. I'm going to stop at that, and maybe we can have questions later.
Thank you, Abhijit. So that goes to the root of India's trade policy debate. What Abhijit has captured in his inimitable style, which is, do you sequence reform and do you make sure it is led domestically, which is another way of saying government needs policy space. The word policy space, known to most people who appreciate trade policy, essentially means the freedom of action for the government of India. And some of us who did trade policy with Abhijit's father, we used to talk of the Mahatma Gandhi litmus test, which is any trade policy action which affects the 300, 400 million people who live in extreme poverty adversely, don't touch it, even if it is beneficial for the 800 million people of India. This is not immediately obvious to a Western observer. He'll say, what is wrong with you guys? When 800 million consumers can benefit, even Pradeep can sometimes argue, 800 million consumers benefit, what's your problem? The problem is the 400 million people who have nothing at all in India, it's a political constituency. And no government can survive. You don't need to applaud, it's obvious. The government cannot survive. See, two areas no government can survive. One is the 400 million who are absolutely living in extreme poverty, not even in poverty. The other is agriculture. These agriculture, that is farmers, the farmer constituency. These two constituencies, nobody can touch. You can have as much of a majority in parliament and so on. Very difficult in India. But other than these, can you look for areas where you can make reforms? But Abhijit, in the next round, you must tell me at least your personal view. I don't want to put you on the mat again. Why is it that labor reform is proving to be so difficult? Is it a fact that we are a federal structure, you think? Because I also believe labor reform lies at the root of it, frankly. But what is it? Is it political will? Is it states and central government? Is it the unions? I don't know. So it will be good to have your view. So Dr. Nagesh Kumar, you come in at a very interesting time. You'll have the last word, at least in this round. And for all practical purposes, we still consider he's part of RAS. He might have moved on, but we think he's RAS. So Dr. Nagesh Kumar, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ambassador. First of all, let me thank the organizers, the Skoch Foundation and RIS, for giving me this opportunity. You were very right, Ambassador Mohan Kumar, that I also consider myself still as a part of extended RIS family. And every time I come back, I feel like a homecoming, kind of. So that sentiment is shared and mutual. I wanted to touch upon the important issue that you made in your introductory remarks about RCEP, whether India joined or did not join, or joining or not joining. That is a relevant question. I think it is, because the door is still open, and so we should certainly continue to debate before the door is closed. And the debate that was going on in run-up to that 3rd or 4th November meeting in Bangkok, I was following it very closely, having been involved in the early days of EAS, the East Asia Summit formation, and SEPIA and all that from my time at RIS. I was following that debate very closely, and what I found was absolutely missing from that debate was the discussion focusing only on the comparative static framework, and no discussion on the dynamic gains that might be brought about from a regional trading arrangement or regional trade bloc of this stature that RCEP is going to be. As we know, the regional trade agreements, different from FTAs, bilateral FTAs, they unleash a process of industrial restructuring between all their members, industrial restructuring that is focused on exploiting the economies of scale and scope, and in the end become more competitive and efficient. So that industrial restructuring happens in such a manner. If you look at the stories or lessons from European Union formation and NAFTA and ASEAN back home, is that this industrial restructuring gives a fair chance to everyone, depending upon their comparative advantage. And so it leads to a process of industrial restructuring that overall the entire industrial sector or services sector become more competitive globally, and this is done in a manner that gives a chance to everyone to contribute to it. So by staying out of RCEP, India, I think, is losing a very important opportunity to participate in this process of efficiency-seeking industrial restructuring that RCEP will lead to. And so I think while the door is still open, we should reconsider this decision to stay out. Some people say that let us first become competitive and then rethink of joining. I think that question is absolutely nonsense, because right now we could be part of it as founder members. Later on, of course, RCEP has this open accession clause built into it. So theoretically, you could come back later to the negotiating table or to join the group. But the conditions of joining or accession would be too onerous for any country to comply with. So that question is absolutely non-issue. And I think while the door is open, India should consider, because RCEP has the potential, not only the potential, it is going to be one pillar of the triad of the world economy. The other pillars are NAFTA and EU, and so it is going to be a grouping of the same stature as NAFTA and EU, and will drive a lot of, and much more than that, NAFTA and EU have economies which are stagnating. They have reached their full potential, and they are now not growing, and you see world trade growth, which used to be of the order of 15% per year on average, now is barely 1%. So this is the grouping of most dynamic economies, and they will be the core of the Asian century if Asia ever becomes an Asian century. So I think this is an opportunity we should not lose sight of. I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Samir Kochhar has done such a wonderful job of gathering all of you. I'm strongly tempted to have a straw poll in the audience and ask those of you who are in favor of RCEP, raise your hands, and those of you opposed to RCEP, it'll give me a good idea. Maybe we will do it if there is time. I can see this is in favor of RCEP. Then my God, I better stop the poll right there. There are hardly 4 hands there. Anyway, you got your response. No, but thank you very much. That is an impassioned plea from an international civil servant about, and that should be respected. I think what India, I'm of the view that any decision like RCEP, first of all, is not just a trade decision. There is a political decision, and it's a geopolitical decision. Secondly, any decision like this has benefits and costs. And I don't think people like you, me, are in a position to judge that. There are people who, if I may put it somewhat facetiously, whose pay grade is higher than mine, who have a better idea of the costs and benefits, so I will let them do the job. Now, since we have a little bit of time, there is another important aspect to trade these days, which Professor Sachin Chaturvedi in his opening remarks hinted at, which is, trade is not going to be the same. I mean, I'm even not talking about global value chains. Already you know the example of an iPhone, which is 26 countries involved, and all sorts of components coming from everywhere, so you really can't say that the iPhone is made either in China, and even the description on the iPhone conceived in San Francisco, made in Noida now, is not very, very accurate, frankly, because there are so many other things to it. But I would like to go one step further, think of tomorrow, and if we can stick to 4 or 5 minutes for each panelist. We have a peculiar situation in which the tech giants are all there either in the United States or China. You're familiar with the expression, what the French call GAFA, which is Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, and now you can add Alphabet and Microsoft. So you have those companies, they're all in the United States. You then have Alibaba, Tencent, etc. in China. In between, the two major economies, Japan, India, Korea, and then of course you have EU. We do not have tech giants. That is the reality of the situation. We do not have an international tech giant. We may have a few local. We don't. So what do you do with tomorrow's economy where data, and I don't want to sound banal by saying data is the new oil or data is the new gold. All of you know that. The massive generation of data is going to happen in India and Africa. China, it's already happened. So Africa and India are the virgin data generation markets. So data is going to be generated here. The question is, who owns this data? Where is it going to be processed? And who is going to monetize the data? That's the real question. And can you do all this without international giants being present in your territory? So that is really the question for tomorrow. What do we do with this issue? So I'm going to ask my panelists to make use of their expertise. If possible, look at the problem. And if at all possible, also suggest a way out. Do you think we should get into an alliance? You've got the European General Data Regulation, which talks of privacy. There are some privacy concerns in India. And most of all, we have this issue about data localization, whether you like it or not. That is a big, big issue. And I somehow suspect the WTO, while it is dead in some respects, the WTO is still alive in other respects, and it may well have an outcome on fishery subsidies and electronic commerce by the time Astana comes. And again, I don't want this situation where everybody else is on board and then we are left, I'm not saying we should be on board, but at least we should be clear what our interests are and how we approach it. So can I start with you, Professor Sachin Chaturvedi? We will follow the same order so that people are clear. And 4 or 5 minutes about your perspectives on this important topic.
Thank you, Dr. Kumar. I think first we should realize that the technology gap that you mentioned in your remarks is not that bad. If you look at numbers, the exports of technology, high technology intensive Indian exports, 2014-15, it was around $1.4 billion. And 2018-19, it has come up to $3.9 billion. So that's the technology intensity of our exports. If you look at the sectoral level within technology domain, you find several sectors where we are doing pretty well. Look at the numbers of biosimilars that we have got in last 7 years. India probably is following very closely with the US when it comes to biopharma. And that's one sector where Indian companies, Biocon and Shanta Biotech, I mean, they are the ones who could get vaccines out. And in fact, those of you who are interested, on Monday, we are doing a major roundtable on vaccine production in India and our connect with Africa. So this is something which is extremely important. In a recent paper, Smita Srinivasan, she tracked down share of global vaccine consumption and India's supply share in that. And it is as high as 57%. So that's where our technology edge lies. Of course, in last 4 or 5 years, government has initiated several programs. What now we need to do, and this is one suggestion that we made for this budget to the finance minister, is to evolve an ecosystem where Skill India, Digital India, Startup India, they should talk to each other. As of now, they are in silos and are not talking to each other. That's where we are to pay some attention. Second, and this is, I think, is away from all this discussion, Dr. Kumar, and that is in terms of the great loss India has seen after privatization of ICICI and IDBI. After losing out these two banks, what India has lost out is the possibility of long-term financing of development projects. As a result, you are not thinking big. You're not really going the scale that is required for a country like India. You ask anybody in the industry sector and they would say, we don't have resources. Now, public sector banks cannot be the source of finance for development that is required. And this is a huge gap. So what we require now in India is a development bank that can finance, or a vehicle that can supply resources for long term. And India has such a huge middle class. In 60s and 70s, we grew up when mutual fund was such a big opportunity and possibility. Now we do not have that fund available. We have an aging population. Pensions are there. People want to deposit them. They require that long-term investment, 30 years, 40 years, where people can get returns. So I think development finance is the crux. India requires it. Technology and the company ecosystem that I emphasized on, particularly in framework of National Innovation System, we need to do that. At the sectoral level, particularly in the geographic sense, Hyderabad and Bangalore both have provided that ecosystem to specific firms, out of which Shanta Biotech and Biocon, etc., have grown out with Indian Institute of Science, with the CCMB in Hyderabad. So that has come up. But that hasn't gone to Pune or Mumbai where financial capital is. So we require that connect, which is extremely important. And third point that I also want to mention is in terms of our R&D expenditure. Principal Scientific Advisor's Office has recently released a report which is absolutely clear how India's R&D expenditure has moved. In last 3 decades, we have tripled the government expenditure. And in last 8 years, private sector allocation on R&D has doubled. So this is where the new heft is coming from. Your third point, Dr. Kumar, in terms of data ownership, I think we need to take a full 360-degree view of this. The debate, unfortunately, has been extremely fragmented. Those who are focusing on e-commerce, those who are focusing on data localization, haven't tried to connect the way we need to see. And unfortunately, the e-commerce policy has not been forthcoming in terms of the wider global challenges that we have.
So thank you very much for that. The importance of finance, the importance of silos existing. So all those are, I think, very important factors. Can I now turn to you, Dr. Bhandari, your views as an applied economist on all this?
So I just want to add two very important points, and so they're short points. I've been, for the last 3 years, I've been researching on direct benefit transfers of all states and UTs. And I've done it twice for all 36, the second time for all 36 states and UTs. One of the key challenges for affecting direct benefit transfers has been that challenge we heard repeatedly was network connectivity. While in sometimes quantity may not be the problem in places like Delhi, but quality is. So that's from a consumer's perspective. And of course, in northeastern areas, there are areas which are don't even have the ICT infrastructure. So that's one thing. And from the producer's perspective, again, through the business expectation survey, we asked firms to rate the ICT infrastructure of their own industrial area. And about 67.3% said that theirs was relatively good. But this is only based on tier 1 cities. So I think based on these numbers, I just want to emphasize that at the very, to make our firms competitive, whether you open them or not open them, that's not even the question. The question is, if you want to make them competitive, you have to ensure that ICT infrastructure is available, whether tier 1 or tier 2 cities, along with, of course, other reforms, not the only thing. But this is one of the key things. Along with that is make sure not only the quantity, but the quality is available. So we were told, so one of the things that we heard from technologists were, that 5G is going to come and solve all your problems. This is not going to matter. Unfortunately, 5G, when then you look at telecom policy, and that is in a state of turmoil. So I think that's something that we need to address as technology. And again, basic ICT before we go on to the bigger things. The second is, so the one is technology, and the second is, do we have the potential to create giants, tech giants? Actually, I think we do. The reason is, at least based on my small research in foreign direct investment, when we looked at, we were looking up and we found that there are areas like Airtel has invested in Bangladesh. It's a major telecom company. But very interesting, we found that that India was importing knowledge from the US at that time on 3G or 4G, but they were exporting knowledge to Africa on 2G technologies. It's a cross value chain that we have added. So I think India actually has the potential, but we have to ensure that everybody is part of it. And MS, I think one of the key things to make competitive along with technology is to work with the micro, small, and medium enterprises. Thank you.
So thank you very much. Both Professor Sachin Chaturvedi and you are relatively optimistic about India's ability to create tech giants. I'm delighted to hear that. My only point would be, while respecting what you guys are saying, and I think that's absolutely correct, nobody doubts it, I think it's a race against the clock as well. Because once data is used, then it's going to be a problem. If somebody else is, and already the data field is quite open. So Pradeep, from a consumer's perspective, how do you see all this?
And let me just respond to a couple of points which you made, and Nagesh and Sachin. I fully endorse Nagesh's point about RCEP. And let me go back. See, we met before the WTO came into being, Mohan.
I know, get.
One minute. Please don't misuse the chairman's privilege. Somebody is complaining. Yeah, right.
I have to bow to age. Please.
Right, thank you. Now, when the WTO was coming into being, it wasn't called WTO, it was called Godzilla or Gadzilla, what have you. There were farmers marching in our streets. The kind of impression which was conveyed that every neem tree will be patented by some American company. The kind of rumors which are happening. And what happened after WTO came into being? We've reduced our poverty by at least 300 million. And your poverty numbers are little... Don't forget that if you increase the middle class, and any economist will tell you, it helps the rest of the country also, in terms of expenditure. Now the indigent population today in the country is not 300 million, it's about 30 million. Indigent. Very indigent. I mean, people who just get 1 square meal a day, 30 million, not more than that. Bernali might be knowing this data. It's there in NCR's database, etc., etc. Now, coming back to 5G and China and Indian tech, we have such large tech companies called TCS, Wipro, Infosys, all body shops. And all the promoters have made billions of rupees. Have they invested at all in trying to do something, even to develop one software? One software, none. Now, on the contrary, so did the government push them to do it? Did they tell them to do it? Huawei, for example, this came out in the papers the other day, has received something like $70 billion subsidies and grants from the government to China. And that is why today they are the cheapest in terms of 5G technology. Undoubtedly, the technology is suspect, that they would have surveillance there. There's no doubt about that. But can we afford to go for Ericsson or Nokia? We can't. They're about 10 times costlier if you look at 5G technology. Now, The other thing which I would like to say is that, why WTO, even Sri Lanka FTA? What happened at that time? There was, everybody was, up in arms. And look at the benefits that we are drawing now. There are political benefits also, many of these trade agreements. RCEP, nobody has raised this question. India has a very clear political strategy of Act East. And when you are saying Act East, then any economic integration can work better as a glue, rather than not having any kind of economic integration at all. Let's not forget that. If we have been, let me tell you something which is, in terms of WTO and dispute settlement bodies, we have said very openly and publicly and written about it also that let's have a WTO minus US. US anyway is a bad international citizen. It has withdrawn from Paris Climate Accord, which is one of the most serious issues today. Nobody has spoken about it at all. From the morning, nobody has spoken about the kind of dangers that we are facing due to this, climate disturbances. And it's, mind you, those who are of my age or near my age, be aware of what is going to happen to your children and grandchildren in times to come. They're going to face worse situations than what we have. This is the coldest winter after over 100 years in northern India. You can well imagine the impact. Australia is burning, all because of climate change impacts. And there are many other things which I said. The time is so short in order to be able to give you all those kind of facts which determine, as to how is it. India has been a very model country. We are respected all over. We follow multipolarity. We are neither aligned to China nor aligned to US. We made that very abundantly clear. Prime Minister Modi made that in Shangri-La dialogue very clear that we will follow strategic autonomy. And therefore the whole world is looking at India as the only multi-ethnic, multi-plural, multi-everything possibly country. And that fabric is now being disturbed. And that will have an economic impact also, Mohan. Don't think it will not have an economic impact. Whatever you want to do. Today we look at Mamata Banerjee in West Bengal. She doesn't agree to anything which the center tells her to do, which may be good for the state, for example. The kind of tensions which are there, how do you expect the country to go forward? Not by UP alone, or not by Maharashtra alone. Southern states have been doing very well on their own. They stay away from this dirty politics, fortunately, and therefore they are doing pretty well. And they are pulling the whole economy forward. If you look at Eastern India and parts of Northern India, we are in a bad shape. And therefore, I don't know how we can expect the reforms to be pushed forward in order to improve our competitiveness. There has to be a sectoral. Abhijit, I violently disagree with you that labor reforms are... Our empirical research shows... Disagree with what? Violently disagree that labor reforms are, wanting, and they are... I don't disagree alone, but I violently disagree on the basis of our own research. The small-scale industry, the medium-scale industry know how to manage their labor. This is on the basis of empirical research which I can send you. So let us be very clear. Don't get into this mantra which everybody is talking about. Arvind Pangadia keeps on talking about labor reforms. Rajasthan, under his advice, when he was deputy chairman of the advisory council there, brought in an amendment in the Industrial Disputes Act that up to 300 labor, the unit will not require any permission from the government to close. Earlier it was 100. So Rajasthan brought in that amendment which is allowed under Article 250(2), that any state can amend any central law. They did that. Do you think that has had any impact? Zero. Nil impact. Thank you.
Thank you, Pradeep. I think enough has been said on the subject, and I think many of the points that he makes are correct from his point of view, and that is the whole idea of having this panel. Abhijit, if you can focus on e-commerce, because it's going to be an issue, I think, whether we like it or not. So, and then I move to Dr. Nagesh Kumar, and then we will throw it open to the audience for questions.
Thank you, Chair. At the WTO, about 75 odd countries are actively engaged in negotiating an agreement on e-commerce. United States, European Union, Japan, China, and a few developing countries are part of this group. India is not part of this group, and for very good reasons. What this negotiation really would require countries to do is to give a commitment that they would allow for free flow of data across borders. It sounds very innocuous, it sounds very good, but at the heart of this entire obligation really lies the reality that if data is what is fueling the digital economy, then countries like India, Indonesia, Nigeria, Kenya, which currently are and which are poised to be bigger sources of data in future, they would be asked to give up their raw material of the digital economy for free. Question I pose to all of you over here, in the past 3,000 years of civilization, can you name a single country that prospered by giving up its raw material for free? I'm sure the answer is absolutely no country can. That is what countries like India, if they join the e-commerce negotiations, will be required to do. Let's go back to the basics. Any digital product really has 3 layers. First layer is technology, second layer is the business model, and the third layer is data. Let's also be clear that in the foreseeable few years, new technology in the digital arena will emerge in Silicon Valley, it might emerge in China, but it's very unlikely to emerge in India. It's a very brutal thing to say, but let's acknowledge that reality. But having said that, if a new technology emerges, it's not difficult, without violating any IP, to copy that technology. It's equally not difficult to copy the business model, and then we can leverage our data advantage. That is our strength. That brings me to the important point, that if we are to leverage our data strength, what is important is to make sure that at least selectively for certain categories of data which is generated within the country, the data stays within the country, and not only does it stay within the country, there's a technological and legal framework for sharing of the data with domestic entities. That is the way to go forward. If we aspire to create digital products, if we aspire to get a share in the digital pie in the future, there is zero chance if we allow data to flow across borders. Our only hope is to make sure that the data stays within the country, it's shared with Indian entities. That is the way to go forward. And we already have a draft e-commerce policy which conceptualized this. It received a huge blowback from the developed countries, from the digital giants. Perhaps that is the reason why the draft e-commerce policy has not gone forward. But the government needs to show courage. It needs to show foresight. We are not talking of today. We are talking of 5 years, 10 years in future. That is when the shoe will pinch if we give up our right to keep data within the country. And the last point I want to make over here is this. India is in a sweet spot. Strictly speaking, under WTO rules, given the fabulous negotiations which Dr. Mohan Kumar engaged in during Uruguay round, we have next to no commitments in services, because of which we can impose data localization. Developed countries can't, because they have taken extensive commitments in different services sector. They just do not have the legal flexibility to impose data localization. So we are in an advantageous position. Developed countries have to allow free flow of data across borders, whereas we do not have that obligation. We can retain data within our borders, leverage it to our advantage. I think that really is a huge benefit that we have. We must not let go of that benefit. Thank you.
Thank you, Abhijit. You know, yes, strong words, but Mr. Samir Kochar needs to be congratulated, because this is the full range of views, frankly. And far be it for me to say who's right and who is wrong. But the idea is to expose to you absolutely the full spectrum of views on trade liberalization, the need for reforms. Do we reform better under compulsion? Do you need to really accept data flow with trust, as it is called, the Osaka track? Those are the important questions. You may not like what you're hearing because it may conflict with your view, but those views have to be handled. They have to be discussed and they need to be decided upon. Dr. Nagesh Kumar, if I can ask you briefly, otherwise this audience will kill me. I'm sure they have some good questions to ask our panelists as well.
Hard stop in 10.
We have to?
Hard stop in 10 minutes.
Oh, in 10 minutes.
I'll take very brief. I think I wanted to go back to the question you were earlier raising, Ambassador, about Jugaad innovation and all that, frugal innovations and India's strength. I think India's strength in the information economy and STI, or science, technology and innovation, very clearly in the informal innovations, the frugal innovations, which are basically applications to use new technology for solving common problems. I mean, you see the electric rickshaws on the street. It's this simple, very simple use of the electric motor to fit it in the normal rickshaw, and it does the job. But it is not a sophisticated, formal product of a formal innovation system, and it will not be patented. So for encouraging those innovations, and this is where India's strength is, there has been a patenting regime of a different type, which is called as petty patents or the utility models. Countries like Japan and Korea, before they adopted formal patenting system, Japan adopted patents only from 1970. Before that, they had very strong petty patent regime. So I think India not having petty patents or utility models, is a very big sort of hindrance to promote this kind of informal innovation system. So I think it's time that we have a new patent regime which allows these, kind of innovations which are coming from grassroots, and many millions of them, to be recognized, patented, and their innovators are able to attract some premium or rents from them. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So thank you. So just to make it, since 10 minutes hard stop, you say, if I can group questions into one, competitiveness, second, trade liberalization, third, data. These are the only areas where, and we don't want commentaries, we want questions to our panelists, and you heard them. So if I can have questions on India's competitiveness, India's trade liberalization and sequencing, and data. Professor Rajkumar, Vice Chancellor, Jindal. I'm prejudiced, but you'll have to accept that. He was the first to raise his hand anyway.
Right. Well, thank you so much for this panel. I'm a bit concerned about the fact that almost all of you had this enormous faith in the government to do so many things. You're all talking about government will do this and that and so many things. So our past experience has been so different from that, one. And secondly, if you remember, you talked about technology. McKinsey has just produced a report. It has articulated that in the next 6 years, it said $25 trillion are going to be contributed through 12 different technologies. And who's going to drive it? They've said it's universities and academic institutions which are drivers of research. Where are those universities in India which are going to provide leadership for that? Have we accepted defeat that it's all, and you mentioned, companies are not going to do it. Forget it. They have their own vested interests to do this. Do we have thought leadership, research institutions which can provide leadership in that? The MITs, the Carnegie Mellons, the Caltechs.
Thank you very much. Abhijit, you need to handle the government part. So the other one, I really don't know who's going to answer that question, Raj, frankly. The thing about universities, I mean, it's a bit of a disaster, isn't it? The lack of quality. I mean, you just have to look at the rankings and look at the number of institutions which do fundamental basic research, and you have the answer. There's a question at the back, And then I'm going to give it to the panel for answers, yeah.
So the question, I have two questions. One is on the competition, and that's specifically for RCEP. On the RCEP, I want to get views of the panelists on, specifically there is a rule of rules of origin, which allows, manufacturing of products across different countries, and you can easily share with lower tariff, and how is going to impact the Indian exports, because if exports within these countries are going to increase, and there might be significant decrease in Indian exports to these economies. And second, the B part of this question is India's absence from RCEP. How do you see it against the policy of Act East and the increasing Chinese hegemony in the region? The second, on the question of data, what Professor Abhijit was talking about. So at the Osaka track, India did not sign the DFFT, saying that this is a topic which is best dealt at WTO. While at the WTO e-commerce forum, we are not participating. So how do you see India's position in this respect on how do we sort of engage in this space? And second is, are the restrictions on data localization and such policies are disguised restrictions under the WTO or the GATT framework? Can it be construed that way?
Okay, Abhijit, if you can make a note of the government question and the data question. RCEP, I will see if I can handle it, but I'm sure there are others. Any other questions? Yes. Quickly, please, before Mr. Samir steps in. Yes, please. Yes, please speak into the mic.
So how can the balance be created between the rights of the workforce through labor reforms and at the same time the ease of doing business with the reference to small and medium scale industries? Because currently we see laborers are not being given minimum wages and struggling with hard and harsh measures. At the same time, even the minimum small and medium scale enterprises are also struggling because of multiple factors, and wouldn't this also be an add-on pressure to them?
Okay. Dr. Nagesh and Pradeep for this. Last question from the back. There. Thank you.
I just wanted to quickly ask one thing, which is around the gentleman that the last gentleman was mentioning about data. Right. I've been working with tech companies, startups as a lawyer. And one of the things that I heard when I was at the recent delegation from Sweden was how India has a demographic dividend. But that demographic dividend is still a consumption story. We're looking at Indians. You say you're coming into the workforce, but they don't have jobs. The only demographic dividend value, therefore, is e-commerce. And the timely implementation of the CCI paper recently and Reliance introducing JioCard, everything just merging. What's your view on this whole demographic dividend and also data? And how valuable really at present is Indian data, given we don't have jobs? Our formal economy is probably 15 million jobs.
Okay, thank you. Sorry? Okay. So, Abhijit, if you can start with the implicit trust in the government of India that Raj was able to detect almost unanimously in the panel, that and then data, please.
Right. Professor Rajkumar, you're very right that all of us have some implicit trust in the government. But having said that, let's not assume that government is right all the time. Equally, it's true that government is not wrong all the time, which is a champion sector which comes to our mind in manufacturing, automobiles. How did that get established? How did that flourish? Because the government went against the views of economists. Government did not believe in trade openness. Government erected tariff barriers which forced foreign investment to come into India, which led to establishment of a very vibrant automobile industry in the country. But having said that, it doesn't mean protectionism works all the time. But it's equally true that no country, be it UK, be it Germany, be it US, has already engaged in free trade. They never do it. It's strategic protectionism. We are seeing the results already in the mobile sector. We've raised tariffs on mobiles, and now you're seeing the possibility of foreign investment coming in. So it may not be totally misplaced to have some faith in the government. But where I do share your concern is in the possibility of government having access to data, particularly if it's personal data. There I think some arm's length has to be maintained. The question which, if I could make out, Rahul, is that you? Yes. The question which Rahul mentioned about Osaka track and e-commerce and GATS, we very rightly stayed out of Osaka track. Equally, very rightly, we've stayed out of the e-commerce negotiations. As I said, that eventually will entail us giving up our data for free. And as I said earlier, we are in a sweet spot. We do not have extensive GATS commitments, hence we can impose data localization, whereas developed countries have extensive GATS commitments and they cannot impose data localization. The last question this side about demographic dividend, you're very right. Given the demographic dividend which we are likely to possibly benefit from, the population will be generators of data. And that is what has to be leveraged to create digital products. If we let the data which is generated by the ever burgeoning population go out, then sorry, we've lost the plot. Thank you.
Thank you. Rahul, if I can call you Rahul. Rahul, my view, which is not a widely shared view, is that RCEP does not make any sense without India. Trust me, and I say this in all modesty, not out of any arrogance about India's negotiating power, for the simple reason that the others have FTAs among themselves. The main target market for the RCEP partners is India. India is the virgin market. So that is my view. It doesn't mean the others can't go ahead without India, because that's a factor of many other considerations. But on the face of it, it doesn't make sense. Secondly, on rules of origin, any trade economist will tell you the principle of substantial transformation. If there is a mobile phone made in China, which comes into India through Malaysia, let's say, and all they do in Malaysia, is a hypothetical example, all they do in Malaysia is put a tempered glass on the mobile. And they say the product is now Malaysian, it is not China. That was our worry. I'm giving you a very real example, and this is not just mobile phones, a whole lot of things in which the product is not substantially transformed and the whole tariff origin changes. Because we were going to have a differential tariff with China and a differential tariff with the rest of the RCEP partners. Our fear was that China will have a backdoor entry into India. This was really the bottom line. I don't have the time to get into anything, and Samir has already got up. So, Pradeep, if you can handle the other thing the young man asked about labor.
I just wanted to add to what you said. One of the questions which Rahul raised is there would be trade diversion among the members of RCEP if we are not there. And that can be to our detriment. Please understand that. I mean, if we are not there as a part of this, and I see every reason that we should be in it. Now, in terms of the rules of origin, I don't know whether how many people you remember, you were all here, that we were talking about cumulative rules of origin in the SAFTA area also. That look, if you're going to have a regional agreement, and I understand the Chinese factor because we've made too much of a Chinese dragon. Undoubtedly, they are a dragon. Undoubtedly, they can, they are a dominant economy. And in terms of technology, they are now even going to be ahead of US also, by the way. I'm going back to the earlier question.
If we have to vacate for a comedy show.
Yeah.
Don't throw us out. We can continue.
This is also a comedy, by the way. Thank you.
No. Just to conclude, no, I mean, in the sense that, we are capable of becoming, Googles and all that possible. Somebody has to tell these people, these entrepreneurs, that look, you can. You have the money, you have the wherewithal, everything. Stop body shopping.
So thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Please give up your hands for the excellent panel. Thank you.
I would also like Mr. Samir Kochar and all the dignitaries to kindly acknowledge and honor the authors of our featured books who are present in this panel with the token of appreciation. First is Dr. Mohan Kumar for his book, Negotiation Dynamics of the WTO and Insider's Account. Please, a huge round of applause, please. And the next is for putting consumers first, Dr. Pradeep S. Mehta.